often thought, oh, just think how 62, 3, 4 might have been if Stirl had still been around. And, well, you know, even beyond that, I mean, he's always said that he would have, you know, without the accident, he would have done Formula One until he was 45. So I've often thought about the pictured Stirling in a Lotus 49, for instance, you know.
Have you? Is he still wearing the Herbert Johnson?
Of course. Well, I mean, do you remember, Peter, when he drove Piquet's Brabham at Brabham? And it's just such a lovely picture because there's this then state-of-the-art car with, I don't know, 4 times more horsepower probably than Stirling had ever encountered. But there in the cockpit is the Herbert Johnson helmet.
Do you think he would have raced the Sharknose in 62?
Oh, he definitely would.
That was the car Innes drove at Silverstone.
It was, and it was, but in fact, Ennis drove it, I think, he was in UDT Laystall colours that day. But it was going to be blue, it was going to be Rob Walker blue. And of course, the sadness is that it should have been at Goodwood, and it wasn't ready. And because of that, you know, he raced the Lotus, and, you know, we know what we know.
And that Lotus actually was Rob's Lotus, but rented by UDT Laystall. I think Rob famously said, I never really got round to charging the fee. I didn't think it was appropriate at the time.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Did he? Yes. Well, yes, that's Rob. That sounds like Rob.
Let's just talk a little bit about Rob, because that's your part of the world as well, Dorking. We take it for granted. We say the Rob Walker Lotus, the Rob Walker Cooper, but when you put it in the context of where we are today, it is absolutely extraordinary that from Dorking, from Pitbrook Garage, emerged this Stirling Moss Rob Walker combination that took on the world and beat the world.
It did, yeah. And actually, a couple of days ago, I drove past where the old Rob Walker race shop was, and I mean, stranger than that in a way is, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but it was in '68. It was destroyed by a fire, and Rob lost, apart from anything else, he lost his vintage Delage and virtually all his memorabilia, and it was horrifying. It was a huge fire. But what I never knew until relatively recently, and all these years I've lived here, after the fire, what was left of the race shop was transferred to Rob's other garage in this area, which, believe it or not, is half a mile from my house. And I for countless years used to get my petrol at this garage. It doesn't sell petrol anymore. I think it just sells vans and things these days. But it is literally half a mile away, and that was quite a realization that, you know, in July '68, that was where Joe Siffert's Lotus 49 was prepared, and they left from there, you know, that week and went off to Brands Hatch and won the British Grand Prix.
Never raced the Lotus Ford 49B of Joe Siffert. The car's entered by Rob Walker, who used to back Stirling Moss. But the Swiss driver holds him off and breaks the lap record to win by only 7 seconds. Joe Siffert's victory gives Lotus 4 wins out of 7 major events.
Quite a small garage, and in the context of today, thinking of, you know, a successful Formula One operation operating from premises like that, it's amazing.
I mean, Rob was a wonderful, wonderful person, and you and I and many others, Ian, Morris, had so much fun with him and so many great times. But what do you think the real Rob Walker was really like? Do you think he was a very clever, astute man and actually understood Stirling perhaps better than anybody else and got a lot out of Stirling? Or do you think he kind of lucked into the whole situation and breezed along?
He was terribly, terribly easy to underestimate, Rob. because because of the languid voice and the languid drawl, and
until the last 10 laps when the shock absorber broke. And of course we hoped if we hadn't had the camshaft break at Monaco, we would have got a second place there perhaps.
you know, having in his passport profession gentleman, you know, that sort of thing. But I think he was very astute. And the other thing too is I think his wife, Betty, was absolutely no fool, and she. A couple of times when Stirling was going through difficult things that were going on in his life, I think, and Stirling did actually tell me this later on. She was a huge help to him, and as I say, on these couple of occasions I can think of, he actually left London and went down to Somerset and stayed with them for days, and they kind of got him through. The other thing I was thinking about Rob in America. Do you remember when we were in Vegas for the first time, the first of the two Caesars Palace Grand Prix? Rob was actually staying at Caesars Palace, and his room, there was a mirror on the ceiling. Well, Rob's interpretation of that was, it's really odd. There's a mirror on the ceiling. I suppose that's so you can shave in bed.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, do you think Stirling do you think he should have retired when he did?
Oh no, that was to the end of his life. That was his great regret. And I think there was a certain amount of pressure on him to stop. I think probably some family pressure. I've heard it said that Ken Gregory, his manager, was keen for him to stop, and so on. And there was what made it difficult, of course, that there was a big insurance payout. As soon as he'd retired, there was a big insurance payout. But
he'd already bought Shepherd Street by then, hadn't he?
Oh yeah. No, he moved in there, and he bought the land. They started building the house in 1957. But he came back exactly a year after his accident and to Goodwood. You remember with the Lotus 19, and it wasn't that he was off the pace. His times were quick. There was no problem with his times, but it just wasn't automatic anymore. Whereas it had been completely automatic. He said, I was just aware I was having to think about where I braked, where I did this, where I did that. And that was why he concluded, well, whatever else, I'm not going to be what I was. And if I'm not going to be what I was, then I don't want to carry on. But what he did regret forever was that, in essence, that he did it so quickly, because he said I was not too bad at all by April 1963, but but mentally I absolutely hadn't recovered, because he was, he was in a coma for 3 weeks. He was out cold for 3 weeks. And I remember Innes telling me, a couple of times when he went to see him, and he said, and it was one of those times, he said, I would leave there and think, I'm not sure he's ever going to come out of this. So the bang on the head took a lot longer to get over than he or even his doctors at the time thought. And he said, certainly I know a year after my final run, by the middle of 1964, he said I was completely different, and he said I've always believed if I'd gone back to the car after 2 years rather than one, I would have picked up where I left off.